I am Jeff Ado. This is Lunacy, where we discern the sacred from the insane and admit that whether we like it or not, we are all profoundly affected by the cycles of the moon. How?
Yeah.
Yeah. My guest today is none other than Leo Mercado, new good friend of mine, who is a botanist, a peyote expert,
Got one more strike before you're out.
kindergartner.
Kindergartner level of life, yeah.
Okay. How would you describe yourself, Leo?
The loftiest application I could give myself would be a plant whisperer.
That
That's
sounds
about
very
it.
cool. Plant whisperer.
Got to lean in on your only talent when
Yeah.
you got one. I do a lot of observing of nature. I've been trained as a cactus guy. I used to work at the University of Arizona as Boyce Thompson Arboretum, nursery manager, but mostly fanboy of my mentor there, who was a doctor of several things. He had several PhDs, but his main love was to take care of the nursery plants.
Okay.
And propagate them out for sale for income to the Boyce Thompson Arboretum biannually.
Mm-hmm.
So my pleasure was to work alongside him. He kind of trained me in how you propagate cacti and succulents, and also a lot of, I guess you could say, oral history came from this guy, from working with him. And I'd stay after hours talking to this man, and he was just full of information about plants, biology, theology. That was one of his zones.
Yeah.
And it was fun. So just to tell you, for what we're talking about today, that's really my only qualification, is a lot of time spent around plants, plant people, talking to people about plants. And that's how I came to the peyote, because it's so affecting of people that it's got its own community, you could say.
Yeah. So just for the, can we talk about the peyote thing that we did or not?
Sure. And in doing so, we also talk about the peyote community, as I just mentioned.
So Leo and I met because we went to a peyote planting workshop to see how it is that one plants and cultivates peyote.
Yep.
And so based on that experience, I can say that Leo is a botanist and a plant expert, because half the shit that came out of his mouth was completely over my head. All right. He was talking about, I don't know, some kind of fucking crazy photosynthesis shit. I can't even tell you what it was. All right. But I'm telling you right now, I can't explain it. All right. He can't. I can't. Therefore, expert.
Kindergarten, basically.
I'm the kindergartner here. All right. So, but yeah, that was a really interesting dialogue and conversation. And I certainly learned a lot about how to grow peyote and what kind of soil it likes, and about why peyote is so important
To grow.
Yeah, right, exactly, because it's going extinct, and also the value of the medicine itself,
And even just the concept of it.
yeah.
Like when we started that workshop, I think probably the first thing I said was that this was all about to remind ourselves that it all starts with a seed.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it all starts with a seed.
Yeah. You and me both.
Right. So it's the same way with the peyote plant in nature. There's been a disconnect, I think, by nobody's fault. If it's anybody's fault, it's the way the distribution system was set up about 50 or 60 years ago. It was no longer about making pilgrimage, going down and making prayers, putting down tobacco, and harvesting your own medicine. You could say by necessity. Texas is almost all private land, by the way. So it was only by the invite of landowners that people were even allowed to do that. But in the last 40, 50 years, fences have gone up everywhere. And now you literally have to fence jump to find a place to where you can go pray, so people don't do it.
When you say pray, you mean go hunt and find peyote and then imbibe the peyote?
Harvest to take home to the tribe.
Okay, right.
In a traditional way, which is what the traditional tribes have, and some still do in Mexico.
So let's just back up a little bit further, because the reason that you're on my show, okay, is that I feel that our society has drifted very far away from our connection to nature. Yeah. And it's part of my mission to rebuild that harmony with nature. And certainly working with plant medicines, including peyote, is something that can be very valuable for people to really get into nature and see something beyond what they see with, say, drinking the most popular drug that we have, alcohol, which doesn't really do much for you in terms of harmonizing you with nature. So,
not past one beer anyway.
No, unfortunately. And, I used to really like it a lot. Now I not so much. But the point is that the reason that you're on this show is that you are somebody who is an advocate, a stand for that plant, a stand for people experiencing it and having that connection to nature. And so I know you're referring to 50 years ago when peyote became harder to find, et cetera. But really what we're talking about, the reason we're here is to rebuild that ancient tribal connection to that plant and those kind of plants and really rebuild that ancient tribal connection to nature and each other. So I'd love for you to talk about how that affects the work that you do and why that's important.
Well, there's that disconnect. That's what we're both saying here. I mentioned it yesterday. We also have, these disconnects in other aspects of our life.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It might be of interest to you that, I had a weird childhood in some ways. And one of the ways was I was always being exposed to fairly influential people through my dad's work with what he did. And at a young age, my dad was assigned to help the fledgling United Farm Workers Union get started up. My dad was bilingual and he was already involved in union business from his work in the mines. Mm-hmm. He was a union rep, and I think it was the
Chavez?
Yeah, and it was, I guess, the AFL-CIO at the time that called him out of union retirement from this mechanic job to help Cesar start up the United Farm Workers Union. So I was raised like that. My summers were spent mostly in the back seat of my mom and dad's Impala with Cesar and one or two of his German Shepherds, because my dad's job was to take him around mostly the Southwest doing rallies and public engagements, speaking events, radio, television, things like that, and also supporting him during the grape and lettuce strikes. So that's what I did for my summers when I was not in school.
Amazing.
And one of the things that was very much impressed by my time hanging out with him and him being more or less one of my uncles was that we always have to give thanks for the people that got our food to us.
Yeah.
When we forget them, we're missing something in life.
Definitely.
And
he was about that. So he would say
he was
grace.
all about that.
Let's hear a Cesar Chavez kind of sample, grace, if you don't mind.
I will definitely tell you that every grace that he ever gave over food at my parents' house or out and traveling always included praying for the people who picked this food, got it to our tables. And not just the pickers, but the growers as well.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
He was a very even-minded man. He was not organizing the people out of any kind of malice. It was really justice. And by the time he passed away, what the slogan had become for the farm workers, and hopefully still is, but it was around 92 or 93 that I started noticing what they were saying was, for a safe and just food supply.
Wow.
And it's hard to disagree with that.
No, that's amazing.
So I relate that kind of feeling to the peyote itself, because it's been a licensed distribution system that's highly under-discussed, and it's what I call a legal bias towards extinction.
Right.
It's perfectly aligned as if somebody had an actual intent to make sure that there was always less. And I'm not saying I believe somebody did. Yes, individuals did. There was cultural discrimination involved in the way things were set up for 100 years there. How would the peyote not get involved in that as well?
Yeah.
So when there was an effort to kind of stamp it out, it kind of got outfunded they started a program to stamp out alcohol. And so the peyote thing kind of fell by the wayside because it was more formalized and chaptered and legally registered and starting to grow.
During Prohibition, you're saying?
No, right after the reservation relocations.
Oh, okay.
When people were all kind of pulled together and moved around.
When was that?
I'm guessing here that what we're talking about is the late 1800s.
Okay.
When I'm not sure what years, but just so you know, I was just reading about this recently again. The Texan tribes, like many of them under the category of different tribes kind of in that region, more or less all got moved up to Oklahoma. And that was one of the ways that peyote was introduced in an intertribal way, because Oklahoma was where they were like pushing everybody over to, you know?
There's a lot of reservations.
It had a lot to do with the spread of the peyote way, but also with the trade in it. So I guess what I'm saying is no real traditional people were left in the region to actually establish any kind of sacred ground, prayer grounds, or even a regenerative, sustainable harvest system.
Right. Because that is the traditional land where peyote grows, and that's the right climate for it and everything.
And traditionally, it's known that people make pilgrimages. It's not purely a commodification. It's not a transaction. It's a relationship. I'm just saying that kind of got cut off in a certain time. Then the fences went up. So the distribution system that was formalized through the federal government and their special relationship with tribal people is that if you were registered as a bona fide Native American church peyote using chapter, then you would be issued a certain qualification, basically a number, for you to put on your peyote purchase form, of which there's triplicate copy, and you have a carrying paper to drive it home or receive it in the mail. But the problem is there was never any consideration for what happens in the future when there's less of it. And with the growth of South Texas, the suburbanization of Texas, oil fields, solar fields,
wind farms
lately, there's a lot of land lost.
They're just digging it up.
You can look at...
And also now you can't go on the land where it naturally is.
Look at Google Earth and you see the fence lines.
Yeah.
Because they're just strips of some pieces of desert that haven't been converted, as they say, converted.
Right.
To either grazing or some other thing. Mm-hmm. And then the small strips that are left then have more pressure from commercial picking for sale to the Native American church. Land keeps shrinking, medicine keeps getting harvested, and habitat keeps getting destroyed. You got three things working against you right now. But then the fourth strike, if you want to put it that way, is that there was never any consideration given to future and regeneration, and specifically that cultivation or even transfer of plants to somewhere else is illegal.
Right. And you're not allowed to plant them, correct?
Even the dealers that are allowed to pick them, cut them on private land and sell them aren't allowed to, let's say, plant seed or replant plants or eat one.
Huh.
They're only allowed to cut and sell.
Wow. That's
so
stupid.
What I'm saying, though, is even after all these decades, when I've had my head in that world for so long and I spend time in Texas and I try to keep track of what's actually going on with all this, I have a hard time keeping it straight.
Yeah, exactly. If it wasn't a total bureaucratic mess, they wouldn't be able to suppress the spread of it.
Kind of more or less based on racial minimization.
Right.
And a knowledge that the 25% Indian blood clause would in itself eventually limit the spread of this peyote way in itself. Through generations, intertribal marriage, loss of tribal identification. And the receipts show that some years there were many million peyotes cut and sold on the legal market. Now it's less because there's less peyote, and that's why we're here, and that's why we did the planting thing, because I'm not smart. I don't figure things out well. I'm no kind of forecaster, but it was 30 some years ago, actually probably more like exactly 40, that I started wondering about this thing, like what was going to happen down there.
That sounds pretty smart to me. So I don't know. I mean, we might have to take a survey.
It was already an issue. Everybody knew.
You're winning the smart train. Okay.
Everybody knew there was a problem down there, but you could still buy it for $90 for a sack of 1,000. And the plants tended to be big. And they'll send it to you in the mail. You just have to pay more because it's heavy. So
still today or still back then?
Still today. But today, it's not like that anymore. It's more like you're paying, $700 for 1,000 instead of 90. And the 1,000 is much smaller, so it costs you less to ship if you're buying it fresh.
Oh, I see.
For the most part, when it's shipped, it's already pre-dried, sliced, dried, dehydrated, so it doesn't weigh that much. But technically, that's where almost all the medicine for Native American church ceremonies comes from, which is fine, and I'm not putting it down, but the system itself has kind of petered out, as they say. It's what they call a supply chain issue at this point.
Okay, yeah.
And the amount of licensees, just in my time of running around down there, has gone from over 9, I think, when I first started showing up in the area, down to 1.
Wow. Okay.
And it's extremely hard to make a living out of it in the first place.
Right.
And it's not a thing where you can just do a startup. So basically, it's not going to continue this way. Then you add on that it's very hard to find now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little disturbing when you really appreciate the plant.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. One, I wanted to mention something about the Cesar Chavez connection, because obviously it's incredibly amazing that you had such an opportunity to hang out with him and call him your uncle. I
realize that now.
Yeah. And also, the statement that he made saying grace and really praying for the farmers and all the people who brought the food to us and all the lettuce, that's something that's so lost in our culture. We just take it for granted. We just go to the grocery store. The only time we even recognize that the grocery store is important is during COVID, when everybody's stealing toilet paper. So now finally we're kind of getting back to, maybe there's something beyond, just what is right in front of us. For me, I know part of my study has been Zen. And in Zen, if you go to do a sesshin, there's this whole ritual around the eating ceremony where you say, first 72 labors brought me this food. We should know how it comes to us. There's 72 different things that happened, which is kind of a generalization. They got the food to my plate. And then I should consider whether my virtue and practice deserve it, whether I deserve this food that I'm about to consume. We don't have that same relationship to food that they had in ancient civilizations or during Cesar Chavez's time. And I think, that's part of the thing of why peyote is important, is because it really grounds us into understanding our connection to nature and respecting it in a very visceral, obvious way. And then, of course, there's also the agribusiness cartel, that's now controlling 90% of the food that is in the world, which has all kinds of negative ramifications for any country that is developing anywhere in the world right now. So Cesar Chavez's fight is obviously not nearly complete. And peyote, it seems like, is also sort of part of that whole mess where they're just trying to kind of eradicate it so that, I don't know why, but it's definitely an awareness expanding medicine.
Yeah. There's a certain earth wisdom in that plant. I think that's one of the overall things that first attracted me to it. And it's almost like I could sense it. There's something about the look of it. There's an aesthetic quality to the plant where they're all the same, but they're all different, just like humans, And you can observe them and they don't appear to be doing anything, but they really are. There's a certain understanding of time in a different capacity when you're tending this medicine, because it's doing something. It's just that you can't notice because your observations aren't clear enough. But sure enough, you look at it every day and there's always something going on with it. It's just kind of like, wow, this plant has a lot to teach about just how life is. So I'm pretty impressed with it like that. I guess I should tell you that I pretty much came to ceremonial ways through my love for the plant. When first hearing about it, I had an experience when I was 16 where a young Apache man gave me kind of a prophetic prophecy that the peyote was going to come to me. His mom had told him in a ceremony.
Wow.
And he showed me the peyote bird rings. That she said to tell you that this bird, it's the peyote bird, it's going to come to you later. And then it stuck with me, but it maybe seeded an interest. And I was just remembering recently how in my junior year of high school, I had a English 3 teacher who saw how lazy I was and not motivated to get a term paper done. And he said, "Can I suggest a title?" And I said, "Well, sure, teach." And what he suggested to me was peyote, oddly enough. He brought me a little box of books for my materials. It was like Weston LeBar, the Peyote Cult. It was probably first Castaneda book. It was probably also Ed Anderson's Peyote Divine Cactus. There were just a few books in here to like seed this interest. And I was like, wow, that's kind of weird. And I wasn't a druggie or a stoner or anything, but I was like, wouldn't it be really cool? Because I was already a cactus dork.
Okay.
I was like, wouldn't it be really cool if there was like this cactus that God left a message in? Like, hey, get your act together. Like they say it is. Maybe it's that way. So I had this interest, but I would read everything I could about the plant itself. And then as soon as I had a job and an actual vacation, a week or a year or so off of work, I would spend that week still pretty young, 19, 20 years old, hunting around in the deserts, South Texas, walking wherever I could, learning about the plants. I fell in love with all the cacti down there, and all the different plants. And that's where I really fell in love with the desert, oddly enough. I grew up in the Sonoran Desert. I was from a hunter family, always out in the desert. I would cry when they'd make me come in from the desert, basically, on school nights. That was our thing. We lived in forts in a very small town in the desert, mostly desert around it, all desert around it. But it wasn't until I went and got this interest in this plant and started going to where it grew that I realized what a magical place it was. And on the drives back to my home desert, the Sonoran Desert, I saw how they were connected. I'm like, well, how is that so awesome over there? And where I grew up isn't? No, I'm just blind.
Right.
And that was so great. That was the first.
You saw how you were taking it for granted because you saw the connection.
I felt how I was taking it because in that Sonora Desert, honestly, I love it more than the Chihuahuan Desert. Like it's my home and it's the home of the saguaro and the plants know me there. And I know a little bit about them. But I guess maybe the first way that peyote started doing that thing you were saying, where returning me to like source in some way.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even eaten it yet, by the way.
Right.
So it was just this thing. I wasn't down there to harvest it or anything. I just wanted to learn about, wow, where is this plant? How cool is that?
That's awesome.
I know. So I had this deep love. And then you have to actually fast forward quite a few years before I actually was given it in a ceremonial way, see it, everything, be able to look at it and wow in cultivation. And then in Mexico for a tour with the Huichol people, the Huiratica, for a few years, making relations down there. And it was after that, coming back to the States, serendipitously, I think, through a crazy reaction to this crazy anti-narcotics task force that was in my little hometown area that mistakenly went on a foray to my home and found peyote. They didn't even know what it was growing at my place. What I'm saying is it wasn't until after all that of my relationship with looking for it, being with the people who knew about it, collecting seed, growing it, that the Native American church came to me to help me out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
They bailed you out or something like that?
No, not possible or necessarily even desired by some, but they prayed for me. Certain people came for the first time to our land, put up a teepee, made a prayer and said, hey, these people are over here trying to do something with the medicine. It seems like they're not really that bad of people. And maybe we ought to just pray about this thing. We don't know. Let's see. So, and at that time, I was kind of told by elders, hey, we'll see in 20 years. See what's up with you, You're still on this peyote road, maybe you really mean it. But I didn't know anything about Native American church. I mean, I knew about Native American church. I knew some of the dealers in Texas who sold to them. I guess you could say I wasn't even really attracted to trying to be a part of that, maybe. Now that I think about it, it was just there for me. and the flow went that way.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It
And they
seems
were
like
there
you,
for me, actually,
right.
as it turns out.
Yeah. And it sounds like, in a way, I mean, this obviously sounds crazy, but whatever. You know what I mean? The name of the podcast is Lunacy, people.
Right.
All right. With lunatics. Guess what? Two of them right here. So even though it does sound crazy, it really sounds like peyote in a very large way chose you.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems that way.
So talk about, I'd love to hear from your experience. I know you kind of describe yourself as a hippie and like that.
Well, a reformed hippie. I used to be. My kids made me have to get out of that gig.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Go kids. But what's
And
been
grandkids.
Oh, nice.
That sealed the deal.
Yeah. What's been your experience of the medicine itself in ceremony? Like, how would you describe it?
I'm not really a fan of describing it.
Okay.
Because I think it's so dumb to try.
Right.
I hate to be that way. But I'm only saying that because if I listen or watch something about that kind of thing, I'm bored in 5 seconds.
Right.
I can't take it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To me, in a way, it's like hearing somebody try to describe God to me. Like on the third word, I'm out of there,
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's really in a beautiful language that I don't understand, then I'll listen. I like that stuff.
Yeah.
In
Right.
English, not so much, I'm just like, if we're sitting here talking about it, we're really not doing it. I don't know, and with the medicine, it feels like that too. But I will say that I'm pretty sure it made me lose all my interest in psychedelics because I found what I thought I was looking for there, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And all it was like a reminder to like be home with myself and like know where I was and appreciate it all and try to be more aware of it. This particular medicine really made me feel at home. And it was kind of the teepee ceremony that sealed that deal. Why? Because it brought community.
Mm-hmm.
My people, I basically found in the teepee.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's my, I hate to say it, but pretty much my only social life. And I don't mind that. I'm not complaining.
Yeah. So I have been to a total of 1 peyote ceremonies in Topanga. It was led by a Lakota gentleman. And we prayed all night long up into the morning and sang songs and ate peyote buttons. And for me, it was an incredibly transformative experience where it was one of the first times I had done like a couple of sweat lodges when I was a kid that were not peyote related. There were also with some Lakota people in Omaha, Nebraska, where I grew up. But I really had the experience of what it really means to dedicate yourself in prayer with a community of people and what that feels like. And then wake up the next morning and then come out of the teepee and look around and see brand new the life and appreciate the world around me. And I think, that's an invaluable experience that doesn't really exist in our modern culture unless you go seek it out.
In the teepee way, I get excited because often I'll show up on Sunday morning just to see them as they come out and what you would call fellowship with them because of the good vibe. And also, I love the plant so much. I'm like, hey, peyote is going to be there. I might as well go visit. It's a spirit, it's beyond the plant.
Mm-hmm.
I guess to really talk about what you're asking me, in terms of the ceremony and peyote and what it is, like, I don't know, man. But I do gain an understanding over time that the part you see is the smallest part of it. And that's kind of what they tell us in the ceremony is like what happens in here is just like for you to set how you want it to be out there. So the plant I'm looking at, when I'm like checking my garden out and looking at flowers and stuff, I'm like, you're kind of little, you're just sitting there all low and cute and everything, but I know you're doing something, it's like a bigger spirit because like you said, you go to this one teepee and you meet people and stuff. Then think about fast forwarding that 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. What happens is we all saw each other's kids grow up. And now those kids are adults and they're going to their own ceremonies. Mine just came back from Navajo Reservation today, where he went to his own ceremony over there. Really proud of him. He's 19, and he's starting to take that on for himself now. And it makes a dad feel good. So that's the kind of thing, I'm talking about that peyote actually gave us as a family.
That's
And
beautiful.
quite actually, my kids came through it because peyote much predates them. I guess maybe you had a point when you said peyote picked me, because when I really review the history, it's really that way.
Mm-hmm.
I should steer you for a second, get a little bit lunatic here.
Okay, let's go.
And say the weirdness of plants being illegal. How about that?
It makes no sense to me.
It makes no sense.
Make plants illegal, and especially plants that are medicinal in value for people. I mean, that add something to them or give them experiences. And there's so much evidence these days that hallucinogens have played a key role in the evolution of humanity and expanding our minds, etc.
There's that too. Here's where you have a legal bias toward extinction, because this peyote gets caught up with drugs.
Right.
And whatever year, like I say, I need a wall chart now to keep everything straight. But maybe 1970 with the Controlled Substances Act or something, all of a sudden, bam, it's Schedule 1,
Yeah.
But there is this exemption, and it's been more codified in the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that tribal people have a clear right to possess. My point being, there still is no provision for cultivation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And specifically, not just for conservation, but not even as a religious right. Now, one could make the case that it is a religious right. And that's why I say the idea of illegal plants is obnoxious.
It is.
You would think if there is any naturally endowed religious right on this planet, it must be to have a relationship with the biology around you.
Yeah, exactly.
So that legal bias towards extinction is in full effect. And there's very few people, but now more, that have a history of saying cultivation is going to have to play a part because of what we've neglected for the last 50 years. It's not my personal first choice. It's pretty much my second or third. The first is that there would have been a way to conserve it in habitat, but we drove down that highway really fast, really far.
Yeah. And the value is not obvious to the people that are in charge. The value of peyote and that plant.
I don't even see the means of doing it if the value was recognized. At this point, it's almost like it's past putting on the brakes.
Yeah.
You got to put on the parachute or something. Right. I don't know, because you're going over the cliff with this thing.
Yeah.
Even based on just land use, you go down there and literally look, and it's very hard for people to get a lease on any land that actually has peyote on it still.
Yeah, which is crazy. It's just crazy.
Sad.
So, and part of the thing with the plants being illegal and that we shouldn't have plants be illegal because that's just stupid. All right. It is. It's dumb. With peyote for sure, you can't even overdose on peyote. It's not something that you can take too much of. It's self-regulating, isn't it?
No, you're right about that. It's completely self-regulating. Mixing it with other drugs, seriously, and I'm not even coming from a spiritual, traditional place, I think that's bullshit. And you're wasting something precious.
Dumb idea, for sure. For you, Leo, what is sacred and what is insane?
The quick answer that I come up with that I know is true for me is that the creation is sacred and our disconnection from it is insane. And the reason I say that is because when I did my first spirit walks out in the desert with medicine, with peyote, where I would fast and just go out and do all Jesus style, and not the 40 day and 40 nights, but usually about 3 days and nights out there, out and about, doing a walkabout, I realized that everything in my brain and in my body, all except the water, was like some commercially produced thing. Like even the thoughts, because I had been raised on too much TV.
Oh, yeah. That's fascinating. Okay.
And I started thinking that is insane, dude.
Yeah.
Also, it made me realize, why do psychedelics at all? Because the reality is I'm tripping till I eat medicine.
You're tripping on regular reality until you eat
I'm
medicine.
tripping on my own thoughts, unfortunately. You know, I'm trying to be less that way. But like especially when I was young, and like pretty much my information, well, there's school and there's teachers and I had family, but I'm just saying like my idea of like my place in nature came about as a commercial aspect of TV and the food that we were being sold.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know when I was in college, I used to go camping by myself quite a bit. And my experience of that was always that like for the first 3-4 days, I was just listening to the thoughts in my head and different songs regurgitating and scenes from movies or just whatever was going on, just things that had been fed to me over time. And then after maybe 3-4 days, that dissipated. And then I got into the self-reliance aspect. Here I am. I got to filter my own water. I got to cook my own food. I'm here with nature. I'm listening to the birds and, part of it. But it took that long to get to a point of like sanity.
Or at least knowing that such might exist.
Yeah.
I've been trying to work towards it. Life gets busy, You got to do what you got to do. And then especially when you're raising family and everything. But I try to keep keyed into the things that I understood in the desert.
Yeah.
Or I'm saying like, I couldn't quite understand, but I knew something was there about it. And that's, I think, how I developed this trust that the peyote is more than what you see.
Yeah.
Because I see these effects that it has. You can look at some of them directly. Like, there's peyote right there. That's a piece of peyote beadwork that's done in the Native American church for our instruments, right? Mm-hmm. And so I guess what I'm saying is one of the things peyote is doing in this world is it's producing art.
Right. And very cool looking art, by the way.
It's producing music.
Yeah.
Songs.
Right.
It's producing stories and teachings, family connections, babies.
Yeah. And
beyond what we can see as well, I see how it seems to do other things like that are non-visible. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it might even drive the point home with something that you might call synchronicity, or others would call it a miracle. Mm-hmm. And what's the difference? Because even the simplest of synchronicities can blow your mind.
Yeah.
So maybe the real miracle is having your mind reset.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about with like the desert experience with me, your camping experience.
Yeah.
Like nature can reset your body and your mind.
For sure. 100%.
I don't even think that's that shamanic.
No.
And it shouldn't be that cutting edge.
It's really not. I mean, that and, you're talking about growing your own food. I know my wife and I, we just moved here about a year ago. And, one of the reasons that we bought this house is that right behind that window was this like beautiful garden that was already set up with all this NID water flow and like filter. It's like, you have to be an idiot not to be able to grow something in this garden. So for me and my wife, like we've really like gotten into growing strawberries and raspberries and zucchini and squash and all kinds of stuff, tomatoes, and it's so there's nothing more. I can't even describe just eating from your own garden and what that's like to be connected to the food in such a visceral way where I know that this came from my own garden. I know the water that went into it came from underneath this land. There's something that's so sacred and beautiful about that and connected that I feel like, so many of us are missing. Certainly I was missing that living in Los Angeles for 20 years,
Yeah, well, completely forgivable in modern times, but it's also maybe a little bit crazy making on some level.
You wonder why. We have a lot of the problems that we have, but so much of it is, I think, because we've separated ourselves from nature. I know for me, and part of the peyote journey and also, we talk about plant medicine, I've done some ayahuasca journeys and that I found that to be for myself very beneficial. It's not for everybody. And of course you need to make sure that you're in very safe circumstances with somebody who really, really knows what they're doing, because things can go weird. But I know for me personally, it's been very helpful in terms of building my connection to nature and also recognizing the spirit of the creator, the creation, and recognizing my own part in that, dedicating myself to that, having faith in my path, that I'm on the right course and doing the right thing. And, that I'm living my my purpose. I do believe that both of those plants are guiding us to live more in harmony with nature and really, correct kind of the actions that we collectively have perpetrated for so many years where we've been separate, where we haven't been connected.
And like how you're saying, growing your own food, like that is like nature's process of you seeing the soil that's becoming you.
Right.
You're actually taking in the earth elements that way. I have that feeling about the peyote. When you eat that, it's like to me, it has the taste of everything on earth. Like the first time I ever chewed the fresh medicine, the green, fresh peyote, it doesn't taste bad. It just tastes like everything. I don't know. That's just the idea it gave me. And having said that, I myself am not really about eating peyote. For me, it's about understanding that it's a food and a medicine and how it helps people. I'm more like what do you call these sports geeks, that like keep stats and, like a baseball fanatic.
Sports geeks.
Yeah, okay, that's what you call them. That's the technical term.
Yeah.
All right, I'm kind of more like that. Yeah. I'm like, I am just like intrigued by all aspects, like especially the cultural aspects for some reason. I just like love to know how like this story, this family, that tribe, they're teaching about it, they're understanding about it, their words for it, their songs of it. There's something about that I find fascinating.
Absolutely.
And like none of that stuff like you have to eat peyote about.
No.
Like that is not, it's like the least of it in a way. I guess what I'm saying is eating peyote is the least of it for me.
That's great.
It's kind of weird because I understand that. I actually, I love going to ceremonies, but it's not even really my main thing. What my main thing really is to see how that continues.
Yeah.
And since I believe the ceremonies are important for people other than myself, in a way, I've come to this really, I guess what you call a non-anthropocentric view of why peyote needs to be conserved and why I'm personally interested in it. It's not because I need it. Or want it.
Right.
It's not even because humans need it. And although a lot of people rely on it. So recognizing that, yes, I think it's important and it's a sacred relationship. But I'm almost more interested in like, how are you going to continue this?
Yeah.
So let's see if our kids can start understanding that it starts from a seed.
Are you familiar with the peyote origin story? Do you know that story
about
the deer?
It's fashioned to different people in different tribes, but it's the basic idea is that he's lost and somebody finds medicine and survives their hunger and thirst.
The medicine,
and most stories include a breastfeeding mother being this person who runs out of milk for her child and lays under a shrub to die. That's the one that I remember hearing originally from some people, and that she was then told to use this medicine that she felt in her outstretched hands, feeling cool and soft, and gentle in this thorny land. And it was her food and medicine, she was told, and she was able to provide milk for her child. And not only that, but I love the story where the medicine shows her where her lost brother is that she was looking for, which is why she got lost.
Oh, wow.
So then she helps him out, shows him this medicine, takes it home, and the spirit gives it to their tribe. The root of this is more like the Nahuatl people, relations of the Aztecian language family of Nahuatl. And the Wirarica specifically have this relationship with deer, which identifies it as peyote. Just a separate incarnation. People have called it the Trinity, but that's just kind of trying to make it into westernized Christianity lingo, I think. But really, they look at the corn and the deer and the peyote, the life-sustaining elements. That's like a triple-headed being. That are 100% connected in relation to each other, so that you honor the one, the other, and you need them all, Yeah. And you hold yourself in a right relationship to them. So that's why they have to pilgrimage. They have to offer offerings. They have to make certain sacrifices. They have to hold themselves separate as pilgrims. And yes, the teaching is that the blue deer Kayumari, that he guides the original people into this world through a portal. In their words, it's an entranceway between worlds, and that deer is able to navigate back and forth, but he leads people into this one, and they fall in love with the place, the waterfalls, the pretty girls, the mountains, all the hangouts on the beach and stuff, and they forget their gods, that they're spiritual people. And so they start, chasing tail and making like people do, and just like forgetting about the ceremonies and the way back through. So, but that deer, he's also a bit of a trickster, and his beautiful trick is he runs through the desert and flowers sprout in his hoof prints, and those are the peyotes. So that the people always have a way, and they call it following the little deer. So that if you follow that little deer, you hunt that peyote just like it's the deer, and it'll remember you.
Wow.
To who you are,
That's beautiful.
But you have to act right too. It's not just eating the peyote.
Right.
It's like the whole year goes into that. There's a society for it.
Yeah.
And a schedule, calendar about it.
You mentioned pilgrimages. People go on pilgrimages to go find the medicine, and there's a whole system that happens, a way of, of going to find the medicine and then doing the medicine in preparation. Could you tell us a little bit about what that's like, what that process is?
I think it's like describable in, I guess you could say, Western semi-esoteric terms as like a self-reflecting biofeedback event.
Okay.
In that they say once you make the dedication, it's a thing, whatever the ceremony is in your mind, and to play it out in reality and make that round cycle, that complete cycle of your intent, move forward by your actions, your dedication, your resolve, and then coming back home, in this case, with the medicine. That's the way it is for the Huichol people, the Wirarika. They make this intention, far ahead of their pilgrimage of when that's scheduled. There's certain ceremonies and things that take place. There's also a sacrifice of a deer or a bull that's involved ahead of time. You're literally making offerings, and you're taking ofrendas with you as well.
Ofrendas?
Offerings. Cute things like coins, chocolate, candles.
Okay.
Happy things that you take to a friend.
Okay.
You have a real friendly relationship with the plant. That, in fact, is what really attracted me to them. And I saw that in their art. They have a beautiful, almost childlike way of explaining their mythology in their art.
Attracted you to the what? To
the Wirarika tribe, the Huichol people.
Wirarika. The Huichol people, okay.
Huichol is kind of like the Spanish name for the tribe.
Uh-huh.
And they have this relationship with the plant. That's really what fascinated me about them. It's not because they decided it. It's just been a part of them for so long. And they make a point of being extremely respectful and careful about maintaining that relationship. And it's not that all Huichols are eating the peyote. It's that it's essential to their culture, to their cycle as a people. And they believe it essential to their health, their crops, the ecology of where they live, the weather, and the larger world.
Yeah.
So when they're making pilgrimages and making prayers, they don't just believe they're doing it for themselves. Far from it. They have pretty much a global interest, I guess you'd say, in keeping the pilgrimage going.
Yeah.
And I like that about them. But again, I'm a cactus dork. So one of the main things that I wanted to know is like, how do you understand this plant, this medicine?
Yeah.
How is it for you?
Uh-huh.
I was very fortunate to be down in Mexico before this particular elder passed away. And his name was Don Jose Matsua Rios. And I believe when he died, it said that he was 106 years old. What I remember about him most sweetly was that when we would come back from pilgrimage, which he was no longer going on, because, you know, a certain group are selected to do this, you know, and they're not the ones who are 100 years old either. So he had had his time on pilgrimage. So we would bring him back a few special cut plants, you know, just like big grandfathers, just beauties, nice specimens. And I'd think of him. So I would cut one or maybe two. And I'd say, this is for Don Jose. We'd get back there. And when I would bring them out for him, he would just like start laughing, and he'd call his like relatives, hey, come over here. Come look at what they brought me, you know? And then he's like, oh, son, thank you so much. These people around here, they don't really care. And they're like, you know, he would touch himself with it. He'd talk to it, and he'd be like laughing and joking like a friend had showed up. And that got to me. I was just like, that's a good way to be with this medicine.
That's great. That's great. So when you go on pilgrimage, that means you're going to hunt for the peyote with a group of people, and you're all just wandering the desert looking for this plant.
Well, in that way, there's a system to it. And I don't claim to know that much about it. I participated, but they have a tradition and a lineage in places that you stop along the way, and abstaining from food and, you know, horsing around with each other, and being very straightforward with each other, and also being cheerful, you know, but being very humble, basically.
Okay, so be humble, be cheerful, don't horse around. So abstain, to be chaste.
Yes.
Right? And then you stop at certain places along the way that are like ceremonial, like these are places that you stop every time on the pilgrimage. Is that right?
For the most part, when possible.
And are the places that you stop places where the peyote grows, or are they just
that's
sacred
the
spots?
final stop.
Okay.
So
the places along the way are
they
sacred
live
spots.
a couple, 200-300 miles away from the actual place. And these days, it's no longer done on foot for the most part. It's done partly on foot.
Okay.
Using some type of transport, whatever can be put together.
Okay. That makes sense. Modern times.
And there's fences and such.
And there's fences.
Things going on down there.
Shotguns probably too.
Yeah.
So then you get to the final spot where the peyote is. And is it a particular place, or do you have to kind of look for it? Like, do they know it's going to be there?
It's a place, but it's a region. And you could say it's the entrance to the peyote gardens. It's pretty much the southwestern border of where peyote starts to grow all the way up into Texas from there.
Okay.
And they're coming from a little more southeast of that. So when they get to what they know the peyote lives there, but it's still a hunt. And you more or less communally hunt the first one and share it. And then after that, after a group sharing of the medicine and praying and giving thanks, then you head out and start hunting on your own.
Wow, that's so cool.
And then you take care of it, bring it home, and it's there for the community for the rest of the year.
That's great. Very cool.
And that's the Huichol way. You know, North American tribal people also make pilgrimages, but they have to be done differently north of the border. There's no public land. There's no real prayer land where one can go unless invited by a ranch owner.
Okay.
So there are a couple of places down there, one in particular that's a dedicated prayer site. And that's at the home of Grandma Garthen. She lived there until 2005 when she passed away at 100 years old, I believe. And she was the remnant of this peyote family that was very cooperative with getting the Native American church supplied with their medicine for many decades, with a real good feeling about it, not about the money, about the prayer, gracious people. She became everybody's grandma. So even though she's passed on for some time now, her home has been a dedicated prayer ground for many years since. So people will stop there and make offerings and make prayers either on their way down to the peyote gardens where they're mostly purchasing the medicine, or on their way home for their travels, they'll make another prayer there to get home with their medicine. So there is still a pilgrimage. It's just modified and not completely tribal. It's individual for the most part. It's as a family can do so.
Yeah.
Or sometimes as a Native American church chapter can assign a custodian to do so.
Okay.
for the rest of the group. And I'm trying to say not everybody goes. It's a big deal. You got to pay for gas, money, usually hotel. It's not like a Mecca where they're expecting pilgrims. You just kind of have to fit in with the local populace down there when you're there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And conditions in general.
Texans.
Even more so. It's not really Texans.
I love you, Texas.
It's Tejanos there.
Tejanos.
I've been down there for a week at a time, never been spoken to in English, for example.
Oh.
So it's really Mexico.
Okay.
But it's a local culture that you do have to fit within.
Okay.
And it's more than that now, because I'm afraid to say, but in the spirit of full disclosure, it's also America's hot zone in terms of like bad mojo.
Okay.
Human trafficking, drug trafficking, all kinds of bad things. So it's very, is it ironic and kind of crazy making for me sometimes when you juxtapose
the worst
human
parts. Yeah.
With suffering on the ground with the fact that the peyote is growing there just barely a little bit still.
Yeah.
And partly it goes together. Like the fact that there's this crazy political boundary zone where life becomes cheap.
Yeah.
And things become highly commodified. That since the peyote is growing there, of course it's going to suffer from it on some level.
Yeah. It's interesting that the peyote is now kind of not growing there as much.
It's been happening more so for a few decades now. Both the human indignities, let's just say, and the botanical ecological indignities have exponentially been growing.
Yeah. Wonder if those things are connected.
So the Weedonica people, some of the elders do make a point that part of why this conservation ecological crisis is happening in South Texas is because the pilgrimages and the prayers weren't done properly.
Yeah.
And maybe not even able to be done properly, let's say. I'm just pointing out that they do say that.
Right. Yeah.
The system pretty much hasn't allowed that to happen.
Yeah. Land ownership, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
People have a need for medicine. Guess what they're going to have to do? In most cases, they're going to have to mail a money order or do some kind of Venmo thing and get the licensed dealer to ship them some dry medicine ASAP. And even that regulated system is, like I mentioned previously, running into real supply chain issues.
And it takes away with the whole pilgrimage of the whole spiritual path of getting the medicine as well, right?
It does. And I'm not putting it down on the personal level. That's what people have to do.
People some medicine.
People are up in Alaska using this peyote, Canada, Maine, it's just beyond practical for them. Let me also say this. If we want to have some good lunacy, it's not all a downer. This medicine is very strong. I do believe that it's doing things in the world, and there's a lot of positive to it. So I hate to say, I'm not one of these guys who's like, oh, humanity is such a plague. Look what we're doing to this. I mean, sure we are, but like I got over that a long time ago.
Yeah.
There's more than that too.
We're doing good too.
In a lot of ways, things are a lot better. We have more possibilities now if we just figure out what to do with them.
That's exactly right.
So
it's not all bad.
I'm looking at it like more people care now about what's going on with this. Way more than did 30 years ago when I first started yapping about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, the peyote has been doing a lot of healing in lives, and that radiates out to the larger community in the world.
Absolutely.
Just like the Huichol people are talking about.
Yeah.
My friends and family are proof of it. That we see the medicine working. The other thing is that maybe the peyote is so strong that I hope that it's hiding itself, that there's more than we can see. And because I don't like to put hexes on things with words, I say this because we need to have respect and need to look at conservation just because it's the proper, honorable thing to do. But I believe that somehow it's also taking care of itself.
Yeah. I mean, this whole notion that I love this idea that it's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, that there's so much going on beyond the plant and its connection to nature. And, you can get we can get a little deep into like physics and looking at the microcosm and the atom and what's going on in the smallest. You get infinitesimal little looks at things. God only knows what's happening. So then here's this plant that clearly provides medicine for people and hasn't, from what we can tell, at least, done any harm to anybody. And then there's this whole sphere of things happening underneath it that we can't even see that is beneficial and has been beneficial certainly for the people that have been using peyote and have been associated and living with that plant and had this relationship with it for so long.
And I believe the fact that we're all talking now, it's not just because of the internet.
No.
It's because like the peyote itself has raised awareness in the people who have a relationship with it. And we're all starting to get on the same page of like, we need to really start thinking about this at the very least. And while we're thinking about it, let's start doing what we can do, not knowing how it's going to be. Let's start planting seeds.
Yeah.
We, Morning Star Conservancy, as an organization in particular, has a plan for at least starting that whole thing. This old saying, the best time to plant a fruit tree was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. That's what's been driving my lunacy. Like, I keep thinking if I ignore that and don't plant seeds today, I got no excuse.
Well, I appreciate you are a medicine carrier and that you're really propagating this movement, that you're pushing it forward. I think it's really important, that kid's,
it is important.
That kid's grandma that, told you that this was going to be part of your path. She knew what she was talking about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, apparently she did. So that's the way I kind of trust it. I'm just trying to go along going, it's showing all the signs that this is what wants to happen.
Yeah. So I do want you to tell the scorpion story.
Yeah, well, peyote is a food and a medicine. And I'm going to tell the scorpion story. Don't let me forget. But I do want to say this. I don't know what you call our Western modern people. Western people, our thinking, let's just say our allopathic way of thinking in terms of medicine in particular. We have this idea that, oh man, I'm going to take this thing, this compound, this substance, and in a reductionistic way, it's going to react with my neurosynaptic, evolutionary, network, and I'm going to, all this stuff's going to happen, man. Or even like, in my mind, man, that's just like this little tiny way of thinking. But we even do that with things like antibiotics. Like, it's not that that's a bad thing, but yeah, we're like, oh, I'm going to take this antibiotic and this infection is going to go away. I can count on it right on. But all I'm saying is we have this idea that you're taking something for this after effect. To me, the peyote is more, it's beyond that. It has a pre-effect. It's not a thing that you have to depend on, like, I have to eat this and something's going to happen. Now, that thing is already happening.
Right.
Almost like when that mother said that to her son and gave me a message. Like, that thing was already happening. Like, I just didn't know it.
Right.
The peyote was already working in my life, apparently. So I look at it like that as a medicine. So it's not just like this remedy because something bad happened to you. We have it in our life so that things can be good with us. It's like ahead of time medicine, not take after something's messed up medicine.
Yeah.
But in this particular case with the scorpion,
yeah,
it even can be like that.
Scorpion story.
But if we hadn't just had ceremony, we would have never learned this about it, which is that we had a ceremony. And it was now the next evening. So we had been up since the morning the day before, up that night, still up all day, into the evening, kind of tired out. 20 people in the guest house or so that were going to stay there before leaving for home the next day and their jobs and all that. But there we were after ceremony. My daughter was putting my little granddaughter to bed. I went to bed next door. But then my daughter comes running over screaming, "Daddy, hurry, hurry. Cheyenne got stung by a scorpion." I was like, oh, God, no. So I threw on some clothes and Yes, I can't go to sleep. I hope she's okay. Run next door, and she is screaming at the top of her lungs.
How old is she?
Just a few months old.
Wow.
I think about 6. The meeting was for her and her life and her mom and our family. That's what that prayer ceremony had been about.
Wow. Okay.
So, of course, I'm like, why is this happening?
Yeah.
Like, this ain't right. This is not good.
Right.
And I'm very concerned. And I yell at somebody to get on phone poison control, first of all. But the second thing I yell is to my buddy Mike. I say, Michael, run out and cut some medicine. Hurry up. And sure enough, he flies, grabs a knife, runs out to the garden where it's growing outside, cuts one, rushes it in, and I take another slice off it to make a little disc of it. And Cheyenne is crying, screaming. I lift up her little nighty thing, and there's a red welt there starting to form. And like, I'm not making this up, people, but like, actually, right when I put that thing on, she quit crying. And we're like, woof. And we're just like, but you know what? She didn't start crying. And so everybody's just like, slowly, people, you can hear like them letting out their breaths. Oh, thank you, God. Thank you. Because the last thing we wanted was my little granddaughter we had just prayed for.
Yeah.
Having a medical problem from a scorpion that we all had to deal with in our exhausted states.
Right.
It's just like the worst thing that could happen in some ways. And instead, like the best thing that could happen, like she immediately quit crying. And we were like, oh, thank God. And we carried her and talked to poison control. They told us all to watch out, what to watch out for in terms of her symptoms and if we should be concerned, but otherwise it was going to be okay. And like they could hear that she had suddenly stopped crying. And they're like, wow, well, that's great. So we laid her down.
Did you tell them?
They heard. I mean, because she had been crying out loud.
Did you tell them that you put peyote on?
Oh, no.
Of course not. You should have.
There was too much happening to go get all explicit here. But we laid her down for an hour or so. And then I just, like, I was going to go back home. And I said, hey, I'm going to check her out. And like, I gently like rolled her on her side a little bit, lifted up her little nightie just to look and see what was going on. I lifted that little peyote slice. And the welt was like gone. And maybe, I don't know, I guess maybe I saw the mark maybe where the thing had stung her, but the whole red, swollen, inflamed look was not there anymore. But the second I lifted it up, she started to go and wake up. And I put it back on, rolled her back over. She went to sleep and she was fine. So, I mean, I gave you that preamble about like, yeah, it works like that too. It's that kind of medicine. But it's not just that kind of medicine.
Right.
And I believe that its most powerful effect is by watching the living plant grow. And that's part of the reason that in the ceremony, there's a dried peyote chief on the altar. Because that's strong medicine just to look at it. That whole eating the peyote thing, that's optional. Some people go in there and don't even do that. But either way, even if you don't eat medicine in there, that chief is going to be there running that show through the night.
Let people know how they can get in touch with you and follow your work and the Morning Star Conservancy. Maybe you could just
I appreciate that.
Plug there.
I am the staff cultivation director and what we call public liaison when it needs to happen for morningstarconservancy.org. And what it does is it links up people who have the interest, but it also links us up to spiritual advisory board, where we have elders that identify with this plant on a very deep family, personal, cultural, traditional, historical level, so that they can always kind of point us towards like, yes, the way you're going about this idea and what you're saying that we should do about it, we think it's good.
Okay.
Or we think it's not good, whatever the case may be in terms of their understanding of it. So Morning Star Conservancy is right now kind of like a information community center for people to make contact, and start doing something about it. I highly recommend that. My own situation online, the peyotelorax.com.
Peyotelorax.com.
I kind of keep a running journal of what's on my mind and what's going on with the conservation. And I've been doing some interviews with people lately in a podcast form, which you can find at the Peyote Lorax podcast, wherever.
Beautiful.
And we invite interest. And this movement, not just Morning Star, needs interest, I must say.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you having me here.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you cultivating some seeds.
Yeah, I'm excited.
It's a good thing to be doing.
Plants going. Get some cacti.
Yep.
Become a cactus dork. I'm on my way. Big time. That's great. All right. Awesome. So just to close it out, do you want to howl?
Old ways right there.
Yeah. Lunacy is a creation of me, Jeff Ado, with podcast management and production by Kimberly Joy Voice, LLC. Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe, leave a podcast review on Apple Podcasts. And if you want to support the show, go to patreon.com/Lunacy Podcast. Thanks so much. Much love.
Adios.